Tonight's story isn't just about comedy or politics. It's about what happens when a legendary entertainer meets a young press secretary who refuses to blink. You're about to witness a masterclass in restraint, respect, and what true strength looks like in the public arena. The ballroom was lit like a stage, the chandeliers glinting off whiskey glasses and cufflinks. In the middle of the room stood Chris Rock, jacket open, mic in hand, swagger untouched. The audience, a mixture of senators, CEOs, and silver-held donors, chuckled uneasily as he launched into another jab at the First Lady. "Melania doesn't live in the White House," he smirked. "She's trapped in it, like a luxury prisoner in Louboutin heels." The room erupted again, though this time not everyone laughed. A few leaned forward, some stopped smiling. One person stood. She didn't ask for attention, she claimed it. Dressed in a navy suit, blonde hair pinned tight, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history, rose from her chair near the back. No nod from the host, no cue from the camera crew. She simply stepped forward, hand raised, and said, "May I speak?" Chris Rock, grinning, turned toward her. "Oh, look, the president's babysitter, here to scold the comedian?" But something shifted in the room. The applause stalled. The laughter dried up like a bad punchline. Karoline walked toward the podium with the calm of a prosecutor and the precision of a soldier. She took the mic, looked Rock straight in the eye, and replied, voice low, steel. "I don't raise my voice for attention, Chris. I bring receipts." And just like that, the tone of the night changed. What had begun as a roast spiraled into a reckoning. A comedian with the crowd on his side would soon find himself outmaneuvered, not by a louder voice, but by a colder truth. And for the millions watching from living rooms across America, the question wasn't who would win. It was whether anyone had ever seen Chris Rock lose like this before. The Metropolitan Arts Council Gala wasn't your average Hollywood charity dinner. This was Washington, D.C., where legacy mattered more than limelight, and the applause was measured, not manic. Held in the stately grand atrium of the Roosevelt Center, the event was an annual fusion of two powerful worlds, art and governance. Towering flags draped the walls beside oil portraits of presidents long gone, military brass clinked gently against glassware. Cigar smoke whispered above leathered conversations at the private donor tables. It was the kind of night where everyone dressed like history might be watching. Tonight's theme was bridging culture and civic duty, and the guest list read like the masthead of a constitutional dream. Senators from both sides of the aisle, federal judges, Medal of Honor recipients, former secretaries of state, all present. At the front of the room sat the honorees. One of them was Chris Rock, a living legend in American comedy, set to receive the Freedom of Expression Award for his decades of cultural contribution. There was buzz, of course. Rock was known not just for his wit, but for his edge. The room expected jokes, maybe even a few jabs at politics. That was, after all, the point of inviting an iconoclast into a room full of institutions. Across the room, dressed in tailored navy with a small American flag pin on her lapel, sat Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary. Young by any standard, but with a composure that unsettled even seasoned anchors. She wasn't on the program, she wasn't here to speak, but as the senior representative from the White House, her presence alone was a message. The administration was watching. When Chris Rock's name was announced, she clapped politely, but her eyes were already measuring the room, calculating not where the camera was, but where the line would be crossed. Host Dana Merrill, a veteran journalist with decades behind the anchor desk, stood at the podium and gave a brief, glowing introduction of Rock. "In a time of noise, he cuts through with clarity," she said. "In a world of pretense, he delivers uncomfortable truth with a punchline." The room clapped as Rock stepped up, flashing his trademark grin. He adjusted the mic, looked out over a room full of billionaires, generals, lawmakers, and strategists. He saw a stage, not a trap. Backstage, the control room's lead producer whispered, "He's gonna go off script." Dana, hearing it in her earpiece, just nodded slightly. That was the plan. But what no one planned, what no one saw coming, was that this night wouldn't be remembered for the awards, the food, or the applause. It would be remembered for what happened when the comic met the calm, when jokes turned to judgment, and when the woman in the navy suit stood up, not to laugh, but to lead. Chris Rock stepped up to the podium with the ease of a man who'd owned every stage he'd ever touched. His black tuxedo shimmered faintly under the spotlight, and that mischievous grin, half preacher, half prize fighter, signaled that the room was about to get a dose of unfiltered honesty, whether it wanted it or not. The applause lingered, polite and admiring, but there was tension beneath the surface. Like a ripple before the wave, he began graciously thanking the council, cracking a warm line about DC traffic and the gala's dry chicken. But within seconds, the air started to shift. "You know," he said, rocking gently on his heels, "I was told not to make this political tonight, that this is about unity and culture and dignity." A few chuckles stirred. "So, let's talk about Melania Trump." The room froze, just for a moment. Rock didn't pause. "I mean, come on, we've got folks saying she's this elegant first lady, and sure, she looks great standing next to the president, but have you seen the way she looks at him? I've seen hostages blink with more enthusiasm." Scattered laughter erupted, some genuine, some nervous. Rock rode the sound like a wave. "She didn't marry a president, she married a brand, and now she's stuck in the returns aisle." Dana Merrill shifted in her seat. A few at the Pentagon table stopped smiling, but Rock wasn't done. "Melania doesn't live in the White House," he said, pacing now. "She's trapped in it, like a luxury prisoner in Louboutin heels. I swear, every time she stands next to Trump, I can hear her whispering to herself in 5 languages. 'I'm fine.'" The laughter came again, bigger this time, but not louder than the discomfort that had crept into the faces of the veterans, the older senators, and the military brass seated by the stage. Rock pressed on, relentless. "Trump's up there thinking he's got the perfect family image, but Melania's got that same look I give my accountant when tax season hits, that please just make this nightmare end look." He turned to the cameras. "They say love conquers all, but I've seen less physical distance between the Clintons. I mean, if love was a candle, that marriage is a flickering nightlight in a power outage." Even Dana couldn't suppress a cough laugh, but at the back of the room one figure remained still. Karoline Leavitt hadn't cracked a smile. She didn't frown either, she just watched. Silent, focused, like a sniper waiting for a clean shot. Rock hit his final jab. "I bet Melania's favorite charity is the one where she gets a divorce lawyer on retainer." The audience exploded, half in laughter, half in shock. Rock leaned forward into the mic, soaking it in. "That's right. Freedom of expression, baby." What Chris Rock didn't see, what he wouldn't feel until it was too late, was that the room had begun to tilt. Not against him, but toward someone else. Toward the woman in navy who had just quietly stood up, a hand raised, not for applause, but for the microphone. It was the stillness that caught everyone first. Not a word, not a whisper, just the subtle shift of posture as a lone figure at table 9 stood. The laughter from Chris Rock's last joke had barely faded when Karoline Leavitt, in her sharp navy suit and signature composure, rose without fanfare. No aide at her side, no press badge flashing, just resolve. Her chair slid back with a soft scrape that somehow echoed louder than the punchlines. She didn't adjust her blazer, she didn't clear her throat, she simply raised her right hand, not to interrupt, not to protest, but to ask, clearly and calmly, "May I have the floor?" For a second no one moved. Then Dana Merrill, ever the professional, glanced at the production crew and gave the faintest nod. The ballroom lights shifted, almost instinctively, to follow Leavitt as she made her way forward, not with the stride of a politician looking for applause, but with the measured pace of someone who knew her words would matter more than her presence. Chris Rock tried to deflect the moment. "Oh, here we go," he smirked, gesturing theatrically. "The president's rescue squad has arrived. What now? Damage control in heels?" But Leavitt didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. She reached the podium, set one hand lightly on the edge, and waited. The silence in the room thickened. Cell phones lowered, champagne glasses stilled. Even the ambient clatter of silverware came to a halt. In the front row, a retired Navy admiral leaned forward, intrigued. Leavitt looked out across the room, not with outrage, not with sarcasm, but with a stare as precise and cold as glass. "I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight," she began, her voice even and unmistakably firm. "But when a public servant hears fiction passed off as truth, mockery posing as insight, it becomes a duty to respond." The mood shifted. Not with applause, not yet, but with attention. Chris Rock still stood on the other side of the stage, mic in hand, smiling wide, but his eyes narrowed, unsure, because what he and the rest of America was about to learn was that Karoline Leavitt didn't need to shout to win a room. She only needed the truth. Karoline Leavitt stood still for a moment longer, letting the silence settle before she spoke again. This time directly into the mic, not to Chris Rock, but to the room. Her voice was steady, deliberate, without a hint of anger. "We've laughed tonight. We've honored culture and free expression. But when that freedom is used not to challenge power but to mock those who serve quietly, we've lost something." She turned slightly, just enough to face Chris Rock. "You've built a career on sharp observation, but tonight you chose easy targets instead of hard truths, and in doing so you reduced a woman's public service to a punchline." The room held its breath. With a calm precision, Karoline continued, "Let's talk about Melania Trump, not as a headline, not as a meme, but as a first lady. During President Trump's first term, she hosted over 50 major charitable events. She visited children's hospitals in 12 states, led the Be Best campaign addressing opioid addiction and cyberbullying, and met with over 30 foreign leaders. Representing this country with grace, she accompanied the president on 15 international trips, often engaging in diplomacy behind closed doors with first ladies and dignitaries. That's not a prisoner, that's a professional." The room, once filled with laughter, now leaned in. Glasses of bourbon paused mid-air. Leavitt's voice remained steady, grounded in control. "You say she's trapped. I say she chose this. She chose to serve this country alongside her husband, facing more public scrutiny than any first lady in modern memory. She didn't ask for applause, she never demanded a spotlight, but she showed up again and again, and that, Mr. Rock, is called commitment." Rock shifted his weight. The smile faded slightly from his face. Leavitt glanced briefly at the crowd. "You say she rarely smiles next to the president. Is that your metric for strength? A photo? An expression you Googled?" Her tone was pointed but never condescending. "Some of us don't need to smile to show steel." She pivoted next to the podium, folding her hands. "Mr. Rock, you told the world that Melania Trump is a prisoner in heels. You mocked her marriage, her loyalty, her silence. You turned her into a caricature because it was easier than understanding the woman. You did what cynics always do. You laughed at something you never tried to understand." Murmurs rippled across the room. This wasn't a soundbite. This was a reckoning. Leavitt leaned slightly forward. "Now let's talk numbers, since that's another punchline of yours. Under President Trump's first term, the U.S. GDP grew 3%, the highest in years. Unemployment dropped to 3.5% before the pandemic, the lowest in 5 decades. Veterans funding increased. Manufacturing returned. You may not like his tweets, but the record stands." She paused, letting that sink in. "While you were making Netflix specials, Melania Trump was sitting beside grieving parents of fallen soldiers. While you were cashing checks on HBO, she was speaking to children in foster care about hope. Maybe that's not glamorous enough for prime time, but it's real. And it matters." The first clap came from somewhere near the back, then a second. Then, like a slow-building storm, applause began to swell. Measured, respectful, but undeniable. Karoline didn't react to it. She kept her eyes on Rock. "You say I'm the president's babysitter," she said quietly. "I'm not. I'm the White House press secretary. And when the truth gets twisted into ridicule, I step in. Not to shout, not to shame, but to set the record straight." Chris Rock raised his eyebrows, trying to interject, but Leavitt calmly raised a hand. "Let me finish." She stared at him directly now, her voice soft but firm. "You've made millions making people laugh, but tonight, you confused laughter with leadership. And you forgot something that men in this room know well. Dignity never has to raise its voice." Then came the final line, the one that would echo across the country for days to come. "You're not wrong because you're a comedian, you're wrong because you're lazy with the truth." The room exploded, not with roars but with thunderous, standing applause. Men in tuxedos stood shoulder to shoulder, military officers clapped with visible approval, and Dana Merrill blinked in stunned silence behind the podium. Karoline Leavitt stepped back from the mic, gave a slight nod to the crowd and returned to her seat. She didn't smile. She didn't bow, she didn't have to. The battle was over, and she had won, without ever raising her voice. The applause hadn't even fully died down before Chris Rock stepped forward again, mic in hand, jaw tight behind a strained smile. He forced a quick chuckle, an old showbiz reflex. "Well, damn," he said, his voice trying to ride the tension. "I didn't realize I signed up for a press briefing tonight." A few polite laughs fluttered, mostly from guests unsure whether the comedy had resumed or if the evening had veered permanently into something more serious. Chris scanned the room, looking for the rhythm he knew so well, waiting for the laugh that never quite came. The oxygen had changed. The crowd wasn't hostile, but they weren't with him either. He shifted his weight, now visibly working to claw back the moment. "Look, I'm just saying what people are thinking," he said. "You can't tell me Melania's not looking for the exit every time they're on stage together. I mean, if that's love, I've been in happier hostage videos." He grinned, hoping for another wave of laughter. It didn't come. Even his strongest supporters, those who had cheered him earlier, now sat with folded arms, leaning back, expressionless. A few avoided eye contact. Rock gestured toward Leavitt's seat. "And come on, 50 charity events, 3% GDP, are we doing math now? I thought this was an arts gala, not an economics lecture." Another weak chuckle from somewhere in the back. Dana Merrill didn't react. Karoline remained still, not even acknowledging his attempt to bait her. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes forward. She'd said her piece, and that was the most unnerving part. There would be no second round. "You know," Rock tried again, this time louder, more aggressive. "You can rattle off all the stats you want, but that doesn't change how she looks standing next to him. I've got eyes." His voice cracked just slightly. "You think I'm making it up? Go Google it. Look at the photos." He was no longer riffing, he was reaching. At that moment, a former U.S. ambassador leaned to whisper something to a colleague, shaking his head. Several attendees checked their watches. A donor at table 4 took a sip of bourbon and muttered, "He should have stopped 5 minutes ago." The slow, creeping realization on Rock's face said it all. He could feel the room slipping. He made one last attempt, holding up the mic like a weapon. "Listen, I've got 50 million fans. I've been making people laugh for 30 years. You think some press secretary with a stack of note cards is gonna school me?" He turned back to Leavitt. "You don't scare me. You're just a mouthpiece for a guy who thinks windmills cause cancer." Karoline didn't blink. She didn't move, and that silence, was louder than anything he could say. In desperation, Rock pointed at her and snapped, "Say something, now!" But she remained still, composed. She had already said everything that needed to be said. The crowd noticed it too. What they were witnessing wasn't a verbal duel anymore. It was a man unraveling in front of an audience trained to recognize when strength becomes noise. Rock stood there, mic trembling slightly in his grip, the spotlight no longer comforting. He hadn't lost the crowd with a bad joke. He'd lost them when he mistook volume for vision, and forgot that in a room full of leaders, real power is quiet, measured, and earned. It was after the gala ended, while hotel valets collected Teslas and black SUVs hummed away from the Roosevelt Center, Chris Rock sat alone in a high-rise suite at the Hay Adams, bathed in the cold glow of a ring light and his own frustration. He had stripped off the tux jacket, loosened the tie, and was pacing behind his phone, live-streaming to his 50 million followers. The camera shook slightly as he ranted, his voice hoarse, his words tripping over themselves. "Let me tell y'all something," he snapped, pointing directly at the lens. "I didn't come to Washington to get lectured by some 20-something press robot with a spreadsheet." Viewers poured in, over 300,000 in minutes. But the comment feed was already divided. Some shouted, "Tell her, Chris," while others typed, "You got wrecked," and "Dignity beats decibels." Rock kept going. "She says Melania did 50 charity events? Great. I bet she did them just to get away from Trump. Y'all saw those pictures? Don't tell me she ain't tracked." His pacing accelerated. "Truth doesn't need a mic," he repeated mockingly. "That's cute, real cute. But I've got the mic, and the fans, and the truth. She's got a title and a podium. That's it." Meanwhile, across town in a quiet White House media room, Karoline Leavitt sat watching the live stream on her laptop, surrounded by a few members of her comms team. She didn't comment. She didn't smirk. She simply reached for her phone, typed a short sentence, and handed it to her assistant for approval. Moments later, her official X account posted, "Chris Rock yells louder. But I came with facts. Truth doesn't need volume, it just needs proof." The post went viral in under 10 minutes. Clips of her speech from the gala circulated alongside her calm rebuttal. Memes emerged. Split screens of Rock red-faced and shouting, juxtaposed with Leavitt standing composed at the podium. One caption read, "When the kid teaches the veteran what leadership looks like." Another, "Chris Rock had a mic, Karoline had the moment." Back on the livestream, Rock noticed the shift. He paused mid-rant, eyes flickering toward the comments. "Oh, now y'all on her side?" he snapped, suddenly aware of the tide turning. "She thinks she won because she got a few claps at a black-tie dinner?" His voice cracked slightly. "Please, I've been on HBO since before she could vote." But the numbers didn't lie. His viewer count dropped from 300,000 to 200, 0, then to 150, 0. Comment after comment rolled in. "Karoline's winning by staying silent. Dude, she cooked you. This is not a good look." Across town, Leavitt said nothing more. Her team didn't post a second tweet, no follow-up live stream, no victory lap, just silence, and the momentum that silence carried. By the time Rock ended the stream, breathless and angry, the narrative had already left him behind. Legacy wasn't built in decibels. It was built in how one responded when the spotlight turned against them. Chris Rock had chosen to fight noise with more noise. Karoline Leavitt had simply spoken once and let the truth do the rest. While Chris Rock's voice strained into the early morning hours, the White House remained still. Karoline Leavitt, now back in her office, sat beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp, flipping through press clippings already pouring in from the gala. Headlines weren't subtle. Leavitt silences Rock with facts, not fury. The night composure beat comedy, and truth spoke once, then sat down. She didn't read them with satisfaction, only calculation. Her job wasn't to gloat. It was to protect the truth, and she'd done exactly that. No need to retweet, no need to double down. One post, one moment, one message, that was enough. Her assistant entered quietly, tablet in hand. "Your post hit 120,000 likes in under 30 minutes, she said, "and CNN just replayed your speech with a full segment praising your restraint." Karoline nodded once, not looking up. "Good," she replied simply. No second statement. Let the silence speak. That silence, in fact, had already become its own kind of message. As Rock's live stream floundered, his voice cracking, viewer count dipping, and comment feed turning against him, Leavitt said nothing more. She didn't clap back. She didn't correct him. She didn't need to. The contrast was striking. One voice flailing for control, the other calmly holding the high ground. And the public noticed. Memes spread rapidly, Rock shouting at a screen, "Leavitt," cool and composed, captioned, "Poise isn't weakness, it's power." Commentators across networks praised her delivery as surgical, disciplined, and a masterclass in modern statesmanship. Even critics, who didn't support the administration, admitted she owned the moment without ever needing to own the room. For Karoline Leavitt, the real victory wasn't in trending hashtags or viral applause. It was in proving a principle that too many had forgotten. When the world is screaming, the one who speaks calmly commands it. That night, she didn't just defend the First Lady, she reminded America that the most powerful voice in the room is the one that doesn't shout. In the days that followed the gala, the headlines shifted from entertainment gossip to something weightier, something that felt like a cultural reset. Chris Rock goes too far, Leavitt calm in the storm, comedy meets consequence. The moment had traveled far beyond the ballroom, beyond the live stream, and into the fabric of public debate. For many Americans, especially older men who'd watched decades of public spectacle, it wasn't just a media clash, it was a mirror. It revealed what the culture had been missing, the kind of leadership that doesn't need to raise its voice to raise the standard. Chris Rock, for all his accolades, fell silent after the stream. No follow-up video, no interviews, a few vague posts, "Y'all know I don't back down," but they landed with a thud. His defenders tried spinning it. He's just being Chris. But the air had changed. He hadn't been taken down by a bigger star or louder force. He had been calmly, publicly outclassed, and that was harder to dismiss. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt kept her calendar. She returned to work like it had all been procedural. Another duty fulfilled. No media tour, no memoir teaser, but the impact followed her. Within a week, she was invited to speak at the Kennedy School at Harvard. Foreign diplomats requested meetings. Editorials from unlikely corners, retired generals, old-school columnists, even former rivals, praised her conduct. One wrote, "In a time of noise, she reminded us of the weight of quiet authority." But Karoline didn't need applause. She didn't measure her work in trending hashtags or camera time. What mattered was the line she had drawn, the standard she had restored, not just in defense of a First Lady, but in defense of public service itself, of the idea that mockery isn't insight, and dignity isn't weakness. And perhaps most telling of all, in an age when millions are glued to conflict for spectacle, it wasn't the outburst that stayed with people, it was the stillness. That moment when one woman stood, spoke once, and let the truth do the rest. For Chris Rock, the night would be remembered as a rare stumble in a career built on provocation. For Karoline Leavitt, it would be remembered as the night she stepped forward, not as a surrogate, not as a politician, but as a reminder. In the battle between volume and virtue, America still recognizes strength when it sees it, even when it doesn't shout. In an age where shouting often drowns out substance, this story delivers a powerful reminder: real strength doesn't need to be loud. Chris Rock, a master of the stage, relied on sarcasm and spectacle to entertain, but he underestimated the quiet force of composure. Karoline Leavitt, by contrast, didn't fight back with noise, she responded with facts, clarity, and dignity. Her calm dismantled his chaos. The lesson is simple but deeply resonant. Decibels don't equal truth. Especially in public life, leadership isn't measured by who talks the most, it's measured by who says the most with the fewest words. For men raised on principles of honor, discipline, and earned respect, this clash reaffirms that poise and preparation still matter, even in a culture obsessed with viral moments. When the dust settled, it wasn't the joke that lingered, it was the silence that followed a truth well spoken. In that moment, the crowd didn't choose flash, they chose fortitude. And in doing so, they reminded us all, the strongest voice in any room is the one that doesn't flinch when tested, and never forgets what it's standing for.